It wasn't him who was humiliated. It was their honor. No one inside the barracks slowed their steps because of that line. They only saw an elderly man, his back slightly bent, pushing a lawnmower slowly along the road beside the barracks. "Is he still here?" A laugh broke out, not cruel, but loud enough for others to hear. "Probably thinks he's still wearing the uniform." The man did not respond. He did not look up. No defense. No explanation. The mower's wheels kept rolling over grass, bleached pale by the sun. Another mocking remark came from behind him, this time clearer, more deliberate. Then the sound of the national anthem rang out. No one gave an order. No one reminded him. The man shut off the mower. He straightened heels together, spine locked into place by a reflex carved deep into his bones. A few young soldiers noticed and chuckled softly. They didn't understand why he stood at attention, and they didn't care to understand. In that moment, no one realized they had just crossed a line. No one noticed that what had been disrespected was not the grass. If you believe that true courage does not live in the sound of gunfire, but in the silence of those who have walked through war, subscribe to Brave Veteran Stories so we can preserve the memory, dignity, and reverence for our quiet heroes. Walter Hayes appeared every morning at the exact same hour, as if a clock hanging somewhere inside the barracks was keeping time to his footsteps. Not a minute early. Not a minute late. He walked in through the side gate, gave a slight nod to the guard, if their eyes happened to meet, then quietly retrieved the old lawnmower resting against the far wall of the yard. No one assigned him work. No one asked what he planned to do that day. Walter had never signed a single form, never accepted $1, and never once written his name in any duty log. He always started where no one bothered to look. The strip of grass along the fence worn thin by boots lining up for formation. The corners behind trash bins where the wind pushed dry leaves into small piles. A direction sign tilted loose by a stripped screw. He stopped, tightened it with the wrench he carried in his pocket. A cracked step, he bent down, lifted the broken stone and set it aside so no one would trip. There were no wasted movements, no hesitation. Everything flowed like a habit forged over many years, so deeply ingrained that his body knew what to do before his mind caught up. People passed by him every morning. A few nodded politely, the automatic courtesy reserved for the elderly. Most walked straight ahead, eyes forward, treating him as part of the scenery, like the grass or the trees. Someone once asked quietly, "Does he work here?" Another replied just as quickly, "Probably an outsider." Who knows? The conversation ended there. No one felt the need to find an answer. Walter never started conversations. When someone greeted him, he returned it with a short nod. When someone asked, he answered just enough to close the question. "How long have you been doing this? Long enough? Does anyone pay you no need?" His answers neither invited curiosity nor shut it down. They hovered in between, just enough for the listener to decide whether to ask more or walk away. One morning, a young private watched him fix a row of wooden posts along the path and blurted out, "You don't have to do that. There's a maintenance crew." Walter looked up at him for a brief moment. "The maintenance crew will come later," he said evenly, neither raised nor lowered in tone. "This needs to be done now." The private stood still for a second, then nodded, unsure why he had listened. Walter worked as if repaying a debt only he remembered. He didn't complain under the harsh sun. He didn't stop when cold winds swept across the open yard. His hands were calloused, yet his movements remained precise. His clothes were old, but always neat. His plain cap bore no insignia, yet it sat straight every time he put it on. Every small detail carried a quiet discipline, the kind that required no supervision. Occasionally, someone lingered long enough to ask, "Why do you keep doing things no one assigned you?" Walter set the wrench down, wiped his hands on his pant leg, and spoke one of the few lines he ever offered. Order keeps the mind clear. No lecture, no long advice. Just one sentence enough for the listener to either nod or move on. Walter didn't care which they chose. At noon, when the sun stood high, he stopped to drink water. He sat on a step looking out over the yard where young soldiers were assembling. Boots struck the ground in steady rhythm. Commands rang out, then fell silent. Walter watched without intervening, without judging. His gaze searched for nothing specific, yet it wasn't vacant. It was the look of someone accustomed to observing before acting. Day after day, his presence became something quietly strange. No one officially acknowledged that he belonged there yet. No one felt the base was whole without him. The grass looked neater. The walkways felt safer. Small things were addressed before becoming problems. Walter accepted no praise and needed none. He worked then left at the same hour each day, as if he had never been there at all. His silence was not an absence. It was a weight. Something that made people, without saying it out loud, begin to sense that something deserved respect. Not because they knew who he was, but because they felt he carried something old, enduring, and unwilling to surrender to being forgotten. And it was precisely when that silence became too familiar that the laughter began to grow louder, a signal that the fragile respect surrounding him was about to be tested. Laughter began to grow more frequent in the mornings that followed. No longer were they stray remarks whispered behind his back. They rang out across the open yard where young soldiers gathered, where everyone could hear, and no one felt the need to stop them. Walter Hayes kept pushing the same familiar lawnmower, but the looks around him had changed. They lingered longer, more curious, as if he had become something worth talking about. A newly transferred sergeant, his voice still sharp, walked past during morning training. He glanced at Walter, then turned to the ranks behind him with a half smile. "Take a look," he said loudly enough. "This is what happens when you stay too long." A few laughs broke out. No one objected. No one reminded him that this wasn't something to say. The sergeant went on, as if joking for effect. "Train properly, or you'll end up cutting grass here for the rest of your life like him." Walter did not stop. He did not turn around. The mower's wheels kept rolling, leaving behind a clean strip of grass, an odd contrast to the words that had just been spoken. A young private glanced at him, then at the sergeant, hesitating for a brief second before laughing along with the group. The laughter wasn't cruel. It was light, but it was enough to turn silence into a target. The jokes repeated throughout the day. In the mess hall, someone mentioned him as a passing topic. "That old guy always stands at attention during the anthem. Probably thinks he's still in the army." The remarks drifted away quickly like wind through a corridor, and no one thought they would leave a mark. But each time Walter heard them. He heard, and then he went on with his work. That morning when the national anthem played, Walter shut off the mower. He straightened his back, locking into place by a reflex embedded deep in his body. No one ordered him to. No one asked him to. He simply did what he had always done. A few people noticed and nudged one another. "Look," a voice whispered, "he's performing again." A phone was pulled out. The screen lit up. A quick photo was taken clear enough to capture his rigid stance in the middle of the wide yard. The image was posted to the internal network not long after. The caption was short but sharp: "When you refuse to let go of the past." Laughing emojis appeared. Comment after comment followed. Some found it funny. Some added a mild jab of sarcasm. No one said that something was wrong. Indifference spread faster than any direct insult. Walter didn't know about any of it at the time. He wiped his hands on his pant legs toward the mower and headed toward the side gate as he always did. As he passed through, 2 guards watched him, then looked away without saluting. Not because they disliked him. They simply didn't think it was necessary. Familiarity had worn courtesy thin. As evening fell, the story of the photo spread faster. Some people looked at Walter differently now, half pity, half mockery. Someone blurted out, "Does he know they're laughing at him?" The person beside them replied, "Of course he does. He's probably used to it." The answer hung in the air, and no one asked why a person would ever have to get used to that. Walter caught fragments of these conversations as he passed by. He didn't stop to argue. There was no flash of anger, no outward sign of hurt. He bent down, picked up a small piece of trash blown to the edge of a step, slipped it into his pocket, and kept walking. The gesture was so simple no one noticed, but it said more than any defense ever could. By the end of the day, it was no longer about one misunderstood man. It had become a shared joke, a collective story anyone could join without bearing responsibility. Walter stood in the middle of it all, silent, like a mirror reflecting how easily people judge when they feel no need to know why. He left the base as the sky began to darken. His back was still straight, his steps still steady. No one called after him. No one apologized. And in that silence, an invisible line had been crossed, not by one person, but by an entire group. From the moment judgment became ordinary, nothing could be stopped by silence anymore. Everything began with a brief complaint filed without much thought. An unauthorized individual accessing the barracks area without credentials. No name. No emotion. Just a single line sitting neatly in the system like hundreds of others submitted every day. No one who wrote it believed they were doing anything wrong. They were simply doing their job. That morning, Walter Hayes arrived right on time as usual. He pushed the lawnmower out from its familiar corner, lowered his head in a habitual nod as he passed the side gate. No one returned the gesture. A short while later, 2 military police officers approached. They were young uniforms, crisp boots, carefully polished. One spoke first, his tone polite but firm. "Sir, we need to check your base access credentials." Walter shut off the mower. He looked at them, his expression calm. "I don't have a badge." The answer was short and direct, without hesitation. The MP paused, then asked. "Then how have you been entering the base?" Walter replied evenly, through the side gate. "I've been doing that for years." They glanced at each other. One murmured just loud enough for his partner to hear. "That's not permitted by procedure." Then he turned back to Walter. "Sir, you can't be here without valid authorization." Walter nodded as if he had long expected those words. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a yellowed sheet of paper, a retirement document. Its edges were soft from being folded and unfolded many times. It bore his name. It carried an old seal, but no rank was clearly listed. One of the MPs took the paper and read it slowly. "This document hasn't been valid for a long time, sir." Walter didn't argue. He simply said, "I served here once." The statement carried no request for privilege. It sounded more like a reminder than a defense. The MP shook his head. "We understand, but the rules are different now." They asked Walter to accompany them to the security office. He picked up his small canvas bag, the one holding his familiar repair tools. No one handcuffed him. No one raised their voice. Everything unfolded neatly, orderly, exactly how a system is designed to function. Inside the office, a young officer reviewed the records, typing a few lines into the computer. "You're not on the personnel list. No contract, no badge." He looked up at Walter. "We can't allow you to remain on base." Walter stood still, hands folded in front of him. "I understand," he said. No anger, no pleading. That calm made the room quieter. Someone asked again, as if to be certain. "Who authorized you to work here?" After a brief pause, Walter answered. "No one." The reply caused a few of them to exchange uneasy looks. They weren't accustomed to someone doing something for years without permission. The decision came quickly. Walter was asked to leave the base. The lawnmower was recorded as unclaimed property and taken into custody. When he heard that Walter looked toward the mower and rested his hand on the handle for a single second, he didn't protest. He simply nodded, as if completing one final task. As he walked through the main gate, a few eyes followed him. No one spoke. No one asked why. The system had done its part. Everything was by the book. Yet somewhere beneath it all, a quiet discomfort spread, unnamed, unspoken. Walter walked on at a measured pace, his back still straight. He didn't look back. The mower remained behind him, motionless like a cold period at the end of many years of voluntary service. That afternoon, the grass remained unfinished. A few people noticed the absence, but no one said anything. They assumed the matter had been handled properly. No one wondered if something had been overlooked. No one realized that sometimes strict adherence to procedure can pull people away from what is most right. And it was precisely when everything closed under the words, "according to regulations," that the truth began to search for another way to be heard. The photo of Walter Hayes walking out through the base gate first appeared like a forgotten scrap of news. No headline, no full context. Just an elderly man, head slightly bowed, stepping away with the familiar steel gate behind him, the same gate he had passed through for years. For the first few minutes, the image drifted by like countless others, swallowed by the endless feed of idle afternoon scrolling. Then the comments began. "Finally dealt with that old guy. Rules are rules, no exceptions. Looks sad, probably just some outsider who doesn't understand regulations." The short lines carried no obvious malice. They reflected the crowd's quiet confidence that they were on the right side of things. A few people spoke up in Walter's defense. "He didn't hurt anyone. He was just cutting grass." Those voices were quickly buried, drowned out by familiar refrains. Security comes first. Everyone has to follow the rules. The debate spread. Not heated, not loud, but enough to split the community in two. One side believed the matter had been handled cleanly. The other sensed that something was wrong, even if they couldn't name it. Walter, the man at the center of it all, never appeared in the comments. He didn't respond. He didn't explain. He didn't defend himself. As the discussion began looping through the same arguments, a new comment appeared. It wasn't long. No emojis, no sarcasm. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" The question sat still among hundreds of others like a heavy object dropped into water. Some people skimmed past it. Some stopped. The name of the commenter made many hesitate for a moment longer. It was Colonel James Rourke, the base commander. The man who had been away on extended duty in recent days. A reply appeared almost immediately. Sir, we were just following procedure. Another added. Without credentials, he couldn't stay, sir, Rourke responded shortly after. Following procedure doesn't mean you had the right person. The discussion stalled. No one was used to seeing a senior commanding officer enter debates like this, even less used to seeing him turn the question back on them. Someone took a chance and asked, Sir, do you know who he is? Rourke replied with a single line. I know very well. New comments appeared more slowly now. Some asked for clarification. Others went silent. Rourke continued one sentence at a time, unhurried. The man you escorted out of the gate served this base before many of you were even born. He paused, then added another line. And he never needed anyone to remind him that he belonged here. No one mentioned regulations anymore. No one repeated the old lines. Someone typed, Sir, are you saying he was… Rourke didn't answer directly. He simply wrote, You mocked a man that many of us once stood at attention before. Silence spread across the network the same way it once spread across the grass that morning. The laughing emojis vanished. The jokes stopped coming. In their place appeared short, hesitant messages. I didn't know. If that's true, then… The sentences trailed off as if their writers didn't know how to go on. Rourke ended with one final line. I'll be returning to the base sooner than planned. There was no public reprimand. No orders given. Yet everyone understood the same thing: this story was not finished. The truth had spoken not through shouting, but through the voice of a witness, someone who understood the weight of silence better than anyone else. Walter Hayes had no idea what was unfolding online at that moment. He was at home cleaning his old boots, placing them neatly by the door. But elsewhere his name was beginning to be spoken differently. No longer as a joke. No longer with indifference. But as a question that wouldn't fade: how could so many people have been so wrong? And once the truth had been named, the next step was no longer debate. It was facing the man they had turned their backs on. James Rourke arrived at Walter Hayes' home early in the morning. No escort. No prior notice. He stood before the old wooden door and knocked twice. Walter opened it, saw Rourke, and nodded as if he had been expecting him. Come in, Walter said. The coffee's still hot. Rourke stepped inside and looked around the small room. Everything was orderly. No medals on the walls, no group photographs, just a wooden table and two chairs facing each other. Walter poured coffee and set a cup in front of Rourke. You came early, Walter said. Things at the base must still be busy. Rourke sat down. I'm not here about paperwork, he replied. I'm here because of a question. He looked straight at Walter, not looking away. Why didn't you tell them? Walter was silent for a moment. He lifted his cup and took a small sip. Tell them what he asked calmly. Rourke answered at once. Tell them who you are. Tell them so things wouldn't go too far. Walter set the cup down. If they need me to say it, he replied slowly, then whatever I say has no value. Rourke frowned. You know they laughed at you. Walter nodded. I know. Rourke continued. You know they escorted you out of the gate. Walter replied, I know. Then why? Rourke asked. Why did you stay silent? Walter looked out the window, then turned back. Because silence is a test, he said. Not for me. For them. Rourke leaned back in his chair. You're talking about leadership, he said. Leadership isn't always silent. Walter shook his head. True, he replied. But real leadership doesn't begin by introducing yourself. Rourke asked, then where does it begin? Walter answered immediately. It begins when others recognize what is worth following, even when no one points it out. Rourke let out a short breath. You know the system doesn't work that way, he said. The system needs names, needs titles. Walter nodded. The system does, he said. People don't. Rourke studied him, his gaze slowing. You let them be wrong, he said. You let an entire group be wrong. Walter replied, mistakes are part of learning. Rourke was silent for a few seconds. Didn't it feel unjust, he asked. Being treated like someone disposable? Walter shrugged. Injustice happens when people believe they're right. Without looking again, he said. I don't need to prove I'm not disposable. I need to know who among them will realize that without me saying a word. Rourke lowered his voice. And if no one realizes it, Walter looked directly at him. Then they're not ready to follow, he said. The answer wasn't loud. It wasn't heavy, but it lingered for a long time between them. Rourke placed his hand on the table. "You set the bar very high," he said. Walter replied, "No, I'm just holding the old standard." Rourke asked. "Which standard?" Walter answered, "The one left by those who came before us. No nameplates, no praise." Rourke bowed his head briefly. "I saw the photo," he said. "I read every comment." Walter nodded. "And what did you see?" Rourke replied. "I saw that I needed to come back." Walter spoke softly. "Not to fix things for me." Rourke looked up, then for what Walter answered. "To show them that silence is not emptiness." Rourke stood up. "I'll gather them," he said. "I'll explain it clearly." Walter shook his head. "Say less," he replied. "Let them see." "See what Rourke asked." "See how you stand," Walter said. "See how you ask. See how you listen." Rourke nodded. "I understand," he said. Walter smiled faintly. "That's enough," he replied. "The rest they'll figure out on their own." Rourke walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. "Thank you," he said. Walter replied, "Don't thank me." "Then who should I thank?" Rourke asked. Walter answered, "Thank what hasn't been forgotten." And as the door closed, that silence no longer stood outside the base. It was on its way back this time, carrying a question no one would be able to avoid. The base was assembled in silence, not to assign blame, not to single anyone out. Everyone took their familiar positions, yet the feeling was unmistakably different. Walter Hayes stepped forward carrying nothing but his upright posture and calm gaze. There was no long introduction, no title announced aloud. And yet respect spread quickly, like a delayed reflex finally awakened. James Rourke stood beside Walter, looking down the ranks. "Today is not about restating regulations," he said. "Today is about reminding ourselves how we see one another." He paused, then stepped back half a pace, yielding the space to Walter. The entire yard fell silent. Walter scanned the formation slowly. "I didn't come here to blame anyone," he said. "If I had come to blame, I would have spoken long ago." A few heads lowered. Walter continued. "I'm here because there's something that needs to be said, but not to defend myself." A young soldier stepped out of the ranks. The same one who had mocked him. The same one who had laughed when the photo was taken. He stopped, swallowed hard. "Sir," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry for what I said. And for what I posted." He snapped to attention, waiting for something to fall on him. Walter raised a hand, stopping him. "There's no need to stand like that," he said. "And there's no need to apologize that way." The soldier looked up, confused. Walter met his eyes. "You only said what you saw," he said slowly. "Next time, look more carefully." The words were not loud, not heavy, but they reached everyone standing there. Walter turned to the full formation. "If you were punished today," he said, "you'd learn how to avoid punishment. But you wouldn't learn how to see." He paused briefly. "I don't need you to fear me. I need you to understand one another." Rourke spoke concise. "There will be no punishment today." A few heads lifted in surprise. "But there will be responsibility," he continued. "The responsibility to keep this place from becoming somewhere people judge before they understand." Walter nodded. "Honor doesn't live in standing straight when someone is watching," he said. "Honor lives in how you treat those who have no reason to step forward and prove themselves." He looked back at the young soldier. "You stepped forward," he said. "That's enough." The soldier drew a deep breath and nodded. There was no applause, no laughter. Nothing more was required. The silence was no longer heavy. It became space for each person to reorder their thoughts. Walter stepped back, returning to his place. Rourke watched him, then offered one final line. "We don't correct mistakes by hiding them," he said. "We correct them by learning from them." No one objected. No one needed to ask more. When the assembly ended, the young soldier remained still for a moment, then turned to Walter. "Thank you," he said, this time not at attention, just one person speaking to another. Walter nodded. "Don't thank me," he replied. "Thank the next moment when you stop yourself in time." The group dispersed, each person carrying a different thought. No punishment was recorded. No disciplinary file opened. But a line had been redrawn clearer than any order. Here mistakes were not buried. They were placed where they belonged to become a shared lesson. And as the crowd moved away, what remained was not shame but a quiet question, one preparing to carry the story into its final chapter. The new tradition was not announced through a long speech. It was issued as a single line in an internal notice, dry and unremarkable like any other regulation. But its meaning was different. From that day on, each week a rotating group of young soldiers would care for the stretch of road where Walter Hayes once worked. No one called it a punishment. No one called it an honor. It was simply called responsibility. The first morning of that tradition passed in silence. Young hands held tools, learning to bend down to places they had once walked past without seeing. The grass along the fence was trimmed neatly. Dry leaves were gathered. A crooked signpost was straightened. There was no laughter, no joking. Only slow, careful movements, as if everyone understood they were correcting something that had once been overlooked. Walter's old lawnmower no longer rested against the familiar wall. It was placed beside a small memorial plaque, where the names of those who had served and moved on were recorded. On the plain metal surface, without dates or explanations, only a single line was engraved. He never left his post. No explanation followed. None was needed. Those who understood lingered a moment longer. Those who didn't eventually would. Walter Hayes never returned to mow the grass. In the mornings, the road into the base was still maintained, but the familiar figure with the slightly stooped back was gone. Some noticed the absence more clearly than they expected. Someone quietly asked, "Is he not coming today?" The question was answered with a shake of the head. No sadness, no regret, just an accepted truth. One afternoon, James Rourke passed by the area. He stopped before the memorial plaque and read the engraved line. A young officer beside him hesitated, then asked, "Sir, does he know about this?" Rourke replied simply, "He doesn't need to." The officer fell silent. Rourke added, "What matters is that we do." In the days that followed, young soldiers began speaking about Walter differently. No longer the old man who cut the grass. They spoke of him as a quiet standard. "Do it carefully," one would remind another. "He used to take care of this spot." The words carried no command. They carried responsibility. And that was enough. Some asked why a building or area wasn't named after Walter. The answer came just as plainly. He wouldn't need that. Walter's legacy was not a nameplate or a statue. It lived in the work being done even when no one was watching. It lived in young eyes that learned to pause before laughing, in hands that knew to fix something small before it became a larger problem. One evening, a young private lingered longer by the memorial plaque. He read the words, then quietly said to the person beside him, "I understand now." Understand what the other asked, why he never told anyone who he was. No further explanation was needed. The words remained between them like a small, unspoken vow. That same evening, Walter Hayes was at home cleaning his old boots and placing them neatly by the door. He did not know exactly what had changed on the base, but he knew one thing. The work was still being done, and that was enough. Leadership to him was never about standing at the front to be seen. It was about leaving at the right moment so others could learn how to stand on their own. Leadership does not need to be seen. It only needs to continue when the guide has already stepped away. If this story makes you believe that honor and kindness never retire, please share this video and subscribe to Brave Veteran Stories so no memory of them is ever forgotten. Brave Veteran Stories, we remember the quiet heroes,